At precisely 7:45 a.m., the doors of Whitestone Tower would hiss open, releasing a wave of polished shoes and crisp collars into the golden morning light. And at exactly the same time each day, a small, dirt-covered girl in oversized shoes and a threadbare hoodie would be standing just beyond the marble steps, silent, unmoving, holding a brown paper envelope like it was a lifeline. No one ever spoke to her. Security guards looked past her. Assistants whispered and shuffled quickly inside, their eyes avoiding the messy braid, the bruised knees, the tattered teddy bear clutched to her chest. For weeks, months even, she showed up like a ghost stitched into the morning routine of Manhattan's elite, haunting the front of one of the most powerful corporate buildings in the country. Inside, on the 41st floor, billionaire Julian Arclay barely glanced at the security footage. He had seen her, of course. The grainy image of a girl with sad eyes and filthy sleeves waiting outside his empire. She was just another persistent urban specter, perhaps a beggar, perhaps someone with a sob story. And Julian, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and unshakable routines, had trained himself to filter out noise. He hadn't always been that way. There was a time, long ago, when Julian had stopped to hand out apples to the homeless from his mother's bag of groceries. But that version of him, soft, curious, open, was buried beneath layers of mergers, betrayals, and bottom lines. In his world now, hesitation cost millions. Sympathy was a weakness. And uninvited visitors, especially ones dressed in poverty, were nothing but distractions. Still she came, rain or shine. The girl would appear each morning at 7:45. She never begged, never spoke. She simply stood there, holding that same envelope, her small face tilted upward toward the tower, like she was waiting for someone inside to remember something. It was a receptionist who eventually mentioned her. "Sir, there's a girl," she said carefully, not looking up from her tablet. "She's been coming every day for a while. She doesn't ask for money, just waits." Julian didn't lift his eyes. "Security hasn't removed her yet?" "She's not doing anything wrong. And some of the staff are starting to wonder. She's just a kid." He sighed, the kind of slow, bored exhale reserved for insignificant things. Have someone tell her to leave, or call the city. The receptionist hesitated, but nodded. 2 days later, the girl was still there. One of the junior VPs tried talking to her. She only looked up at him with eyes so worn and patient that he forgot what he was going to say. Another employee brought her a sandwich, which she accepted without thanks, then returned to her waiting. Every morning, she clutched the same envelope. Every morning, she left by noon, always walking alone, always with the same deliberate steps, like she had memorized every crack in the sidewalk leading away from the tower. But on the 14th morning, something changed. Julian was reviewing a quarterly report when he noticed a girl again on the lobby feed. Something in her posture was different, tense, almost desperate. She was holding the envelope higher, like she was trying to make it visible to someone, anyone, on the other side of the glass. For the first time, Julian leaned closer. He saw the dirt on her cheek, the tear in her sleeve, the red scrape across her elbow. But it was her eyes, staring upward through the glass like she was staring into memory itself, that made him pause. There was no anger in her gaze. No pleading, only recognition, and something else he couldn't name. A voice in the back of his mind said, "She knows you." He shook the thought away and returned to his paperwork. At 11:58 a.m., the girl collapsed on the front steps. The guards rushed forward. An ambulance was called, and when they opened her tiny fist to check her pulse, they found her still clutching the envelope. Julian was informed around noon. She fainted, the assistant said, glancing nervously at him. They took her to St. Mary's. Her vitals were not good. She hasn't eaten in days. Julian didn't respond at first. His hands were still on the keyboard, but he wasn't typing. He stared at the number on the screen. Net profit margin, 23.7%, up 3% from last quarter. He stood slowly. Julian Arclay arrived at St. Mary's without telling anyone. No entourage. No car with blacked-out windows, just a gray coat thrown over his suit and a silence that unsettled even the automatic doors as they parted for him. He told the nurse at the counter he was concerned party, and the weight of his name, rarely spoken aloud in hospitals, was enough to bring the attending physician in under 3 minutes. They led him through a quiet hallway, the scent of antiseptic clinging to the air like an accusation. She was in room 212, curled up in a thin hospital gown, wires snaking out of her arm. Her legs were too thin. Her hair, when not matted, showed glimpses of soft curls that might have once been beautiful. The envelope was on the table next to her. It had no name on it, no address, just the words, "To Mr. Arclay." He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he pulled the visitor's chair closer and sat, arms resting on his knees, trying to remember where he had seen those eyes before. Because now, up close, he was sure. There was something hauntingly familiar in her brow, and the way her mouth tilted slightly when she breathed. He picked up the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a birth certificate. His name was listed under father. Time slowed. Julian's heart didn't race, it simply froze. The air around him thickened. The lines of the room, the monitors, the steady beep of life, they all faded into a distant echo as he stared at the paper, reading it twice, then again. At the bottom, scribbled in a hand trembling with effort, was a short note. She said you'd remember her eyes. Beneath that was a name he hadn't spoken in years, Alira Monroe. A woman he had met during a university gala, a fleeting romance he had dismissed as a mistake. She'd never contacted him again. He hadn't known she was pregnant, hadn't cared enough to ask. And now Alira was gone, an obituary filed away with 1,000 unread emails, a heart failure diagnosis he had scrolled past without opening. And this child, his child, had been left to fend for herself. He swallowed something bitter that had no name. In that moment, Julian Arclay, billionaire, stock market titan, CEO of Arclay Holdings, felt entirely unworthy of the chair he sat on. He didn't speak to the staff on his way out, didn't go to work that day or the next. He requested the hospital file be sealed, arranged for specialists, nutritionists, trauma counselors, all anonymously. And when the girl, whose name was Mira, finally woke, she found a new coat on the edge of her bed, soft and red, with a tiny stitched label that read, Mira A. Weeks passed. The girl was moved to a private residence under the name of a foundation. She never saw Julian during those days, though sometimes she'd catch the sound of footsteps outside her door, too heavy to be the nurse, too hesitant to knock. But one evening, as winter pressed soft snow against the windows, Mira wandered into the study of her new home and found a man sitting at the grand piano. He didn't see her at first. His fingers were stiff, awkward against the keys, tapping out the opening to an old lullaby her mother used to hum when Mira couldn't sleep. She didn't say a word. She simply sat across from him, legs dangling off the antique velvet chair, and listened. When the tune ended, Julian looked up, and she was smiling. Not because she forgave him, not yet, but because something in her recognized that grief had finally touched him. From that night on, he came to her not as a savior, but as a student. He brought her books and questions. He watched her draw. He learned how to cook pancakes with a batter too thick, and once, he let her dye his hair orange by mistake. Years later, at a charity gala for abandoned youth, Julian Arclay stood on stage, hands slightly shaking as he introduced the night's final speaker. The brightest light of my life, my daughter. Mira took the stage with quiet grace, no longer the girl in torn shoes, but a poised young woman who knew exactly how far she had walked to stand in that light. Behind her, the audience applauded, but Julian didn't clap. He simply watched, his heart full for the first time in decades, knowing that love had arrived at his doorstep, not in the form of a contract or a deal, but as a quiet child who had waited patiently to be seen.